Leadership in this new economy is such a fascinating topic. There are certain qualities and traits around integrity and vision and that sort of thing that we've always thought of as important and still are. But today, it also requires, and I would say particularly when it comes to technological innovation and then the role of human capital, HR, if you will, requires a different way of looking at some of that. So when it comes to technology, I think we're today having a real crash course as we look at what's happening far beyond Facebook and Google and that sort of thing. But we're looking at what is our responsibility as, if you will, corporate citizens. It is not simply to offer the cheapest price. It is not simply to get more people to use our products. It is going far beyond that to look specifically at technology, which has both a lot of bright spots and opportunities, but it also has what I'll call blind spots, where are we actually behaving? Can we say, bona fide, that we're behaving in a trustworthy manner? Which is different than simply a company saying, trust us, we have your best interests at heart. So it requires getting really clear on some of the ethics and the ethos of why you're operating. It also requires a real deep understanding of how platforms work and how they can be used really on the one hand to create more inclusive communities, but they also can be used, the same technologies can be used to actually further deepen divides or, if you have an issue with diversity and inclusion, it can both, if used wisely, it can mitigate that, and if used not wisely, it can actually exacerbate that. So leadership in that regard, these are having to make some calls that 50 years ago, many leaders, they may have had to, but it was in a much more physical environment where you could see what you were looking at, and you didn't have to deal with the level of network effects and unintended consequences that we have today. And then briefly on the human side, we're really looking, because of the future of work and this shift in how people are working and the rise of independent workers and so forth, a lot of organizations are having to rethink their organizational boundaries and in some ways kind of redesign their HR department. And this isn't just for the CEO, this is also for COO, human resources, etc. But really looking at how do you create a team that is flexible and nimble, but also keeping pace with change. And so for some companies, this may well mean that in the future they have a smaller core team of employees and a much larger independent talent network that they're tapping into from time to time. For others, this might be flipping their organizational model on its head. And from a leadership perspective, right now, given where we are in the world, I would say the most important trait is to be really radically open to how an organization comes together, as opposed to saying it has to be certainly not necessarily top down, but much more, I don't want to say flat, but much more organic and emergent. It's interesting because I would say we can look at leadership, or let's just say the C-suite, in traditional and incumbent industries and then in startups. And not that those are apples and oranges per se, but there's a different kind of thing going on. When we look at, for instance, I'll just say several CEOs in the mobility space. So looking at car companies, quite candidly. They're really getting what's going on. Now, each in their different way, and yes, they're still competitors, but that sense of leaning into the trends as opposed to trying to, whoa, this isn't happening, or we're going to keep doing business the same way. Now, this is where we have not seen really good leadership examples understanding that piece about the HR department. That is proving to be difficult for pretty much everybody. And I'll say that startups, I'll say that established companies in particular, and especially governments. There's this sense we've built so much on this lifetime career employment, and whether that is how we recruit people, whether that is professional development and career planning, whether that is retirement, it's all of that is really still structured and bolted onto this older way of doing business. So I think that's a space where I would say, watch, we don't really know. But in terms of business strategy, products and services that you offer, car companies are actually as a whole, they're a great group of people who are individually and collectively leaning into these future forces. The startup world, you just find more in general, more risk-taking, more radical thinking. I wouldn't say that we've got, I will say one person that I think is doing a very good job of handling a lot of this is Stefan Casriel, who's the CEO of Upwork. He has not only built a company very successfully around the rise of independent workers, but he takes a much more proactive stance when it comes to not just thought leadership, but how do we actually need to go beyond what we might have been expected to do 50 years ago. And as we look, for instance, as we look at the transition of workers out of employment into a different way of working, we're going to need to look at upskilling, reskilling, lifelong learning, and companies need to actually take a greater responsibility for that, even though not everyone might be an employee. And he's been really a leader in kind of pushing that envelope towards companies taking responsibility for certain aspects that they may not have in the past.